In the spirit of reconciliation, Up Past Bedtime would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the incredible lands in which we record this podcast. By extension, we pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, their past and present elders, and the connection they have to Australia's land, sea, and community. Okay, real talk. I am not a high-intensity 5 a.m. gym girl. I'm sorry, but that is just not me. But I do still want to feel like I've got the energy to get through the day, whether that's chasing toddlers or going to a more appropriately timed gym session, whichever activity is allocated to be my daily workout, lol. And that's where New Harvest's pre-workout seriously comes as my I need to be a functioning adult today bestie. I've been using it for years now, and it is hands down my go-to for activities where I need a boost. It gives you clean, focused energy, like the equivalent of 2 cups of coffee, but without the gross crash or jittery buzz that some other pre-workouts have. It's made with natural, vegan ingredients and no weird nasties, so it feels good to take too. And my favorite part, the sour worms flavor. Yes, that's really what it's called. And yes, it actually tastes like those trolley lolly sour worms. Like, how is something that gives me energy and focus also giving childhood lolly vibes? I'm obsessed. New Harvest is female founded and all about creating wellness products that are made with women in mind. Nothing intimidating, no gym bro energy, just simple, supportive supplements that fit into real life. If you want to try it out, head to www.nakedharvestsupplements.com and use the code BELLSMESSINA for a cheeky little discount. That's code BELLSMESSINA for 15% off full price products. All these details are in the show notes as well. Hello and welcome back to Up Past Bedtime. I'm BELLSMESSINA and I am going to be staying up late with you tonight. Well, me and a special guest. I have the incredible Emily Geraghty coming on to UPB today, tonight, this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're listening. And I am so excited about it. Emily, by far, has been one of my most requested guests to come on the podcast. If you have not come into contact with Emily on any social media, she is an incredible mother to 2 children. She is a neurodiverse girly like myself. She has both ADHD and ASD. She has a background in childhood education and is currently studying her psychology degree with a special interest in neurodivergence. And she is just the queen of no filter yapping on TikTok. You might know her from her very Aka sort of accent, and she has this incredible, funny, quick wit that comes out on social media that has just made so many of us fall absolutely in love with her. She is an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to anything to do with neurodivergence and living as someone who has ADHD or ASD, but also raising little ones that have ASD and ADHD. And so I was like, I have to get this girl onto the podcast because just like me, she is currently going through a divorce. She has been going through an unmasking process. And I just felt like with her knowledge and background in the psychology behind, living and operating in a neurotypical world as a non-neurotypical person, I just thought she could offer so much to you guys. She could give you so much insight. And I just knew that her and I could have an incredible discussion on the podcast. I also just want to give the people what they want. You ask for a guest, I promise you, I will try my best to get them on here. So I'm going to, stop taking up all the airtime with this intro. And without further ado, welcome to season 3 of Up Past Bedtime with me, BELLSMESSINA. This season, we're doing something different, something special. This is going to be a true exploration of womanhood, of reconnecting to who I am and who I want to be. We're diving deep into my journey of rediscovery and growth as I navigate motherhood, healing, and everything in between. This season, I'm inviting you to come along with me because maybe you're finding your way back to yourself too. This is our season to rediscover her. Think of this as our late night heart to heart where nothing is off limits. Because as always, the best conversations happen when you're up past bedtime. Hello, Miss Emily. Welcome to Up Past Bedtime. I did do a little pre-recorded intro to you. So the galleys and very minor percentage of boys that listen to this podcast have had a little intro to you, but we're jumping on today pretty much. Well, one, you're the most requested guest I've ever had, which is so funny to me because I was like, who willingly wants to give to neurodiverse girlies microphones and just like a free range to yap? So I don't want to hear any complaints from this because you guys asked for it, okay? And then also I was like, I need to get Emily on because we have so many conversations about being ADHD and ASD. And like, I feel like we have had very similar journeys. I kind of joked with GB, my partner, that you and I are like same girly, different font, same girly, different masking mechanisms. Like I'm a fawn girly and you're way more a fight girly. I'm like, Emily is who I would be if I was not conflict averse, because you definitely have way more spiciness in your neurospicy than I do. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself to everyone. Maybe give yourself like a little elevator pitch for someone who's never heard of you or met you before.
Description is pretty accurate to begin with. I certainly don't shy away from confrontation when it's needed. So not a lot of fawning yes goes on here. I guess an elevator pitch, I mean, where do I even begin? I feel like that so much has gone on in the last 12 months for me. In the last 18 months, 2 years, I don't even know whether I could begin to actually describe to people who I am, because I actually probably don't actively know who the fuck I am.
Welcome to the club.
So yeah, I think giving an elevator pitch is pretty difficult, honestly, at this point. But I guess in essence, you know, obviously I'm a late diagnosed autistic ADHD mum. You know, obviously I spend a lot of my time at the moment studying uni and, you know, really wanting to go into that space, really wanting to go into that field. And between doing that, I'm sometimes crashing out online, which some people seem to enjoy, but I don't know whether that experience is the greatest for me.
A fun fact is both you and I are going through divorces at the same time. We have a very similar origin sort of story, like married, first serious boyfriend, went and had 2 kids, went and got diagnosed later in life, and then both left our marriages. I feel like it's a more common pipeline for the late diagnosed than people kind of talk about, which kind of gets me, I guess, into the first topic I kind of want to talk about. My whole season this season is about like women in seasons of change, and the whole concept is, you know, when I kind of had my life implode, I kind of sat back and I was like, where the fuck do I even start now? Like I've got no idea what to do, where to go, who I am. And at the time I was like, I wish there was something that I could listen to that could give me like actionable, valid tips to kind of give me a starting point, you know, when my whole life has been turned upside down. I think getting diagnosed is the biggest upside down your whole life can get, even though it's who you've always been. It's very bizarre to kind of go through it, learn about yourself, and then be actively encouraged to, I guess, unmask and show yourself. So for you, like, did you always suspect that there was something going on, or like when was like a little light bulb in your life that you were like, oh, I've got something different about me?
Enough, I actually never suspected that I had any form of neurodivergence at all whatsoever, which is kind of wild considering that a lot of my employment throughout the years and my career was built around, you know, working with neurodivergent children in particular, in tutoring and in classrooms. So I've seen hundreds of presentations in the way that things like autism and ADHD and learning disabilities such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia can present. But amazingly, no. I always had a knack for working with those kids, certainly, and definitely had a knack in being able to pick up on children, particularly in the classroom, who may have been undiagnosed and flown under the radar. But never myself did I ever think that I was a neurodivergent individual at all. My children started exhibiting signs early, but I didn't consider that for myself. I actually went to therapy, and it was actually recommended to me by an actual psychologist that that's probably what I had.
Same. I feel like that's the like kind of pitfall of high masking though, right? Like mine was more like I became a mum. I like was so overextended with like 2 kids under 2 that I just fell apart because like what I didn't know was masking, like what I just thought was like routine keeping and like the type of person that I was, just I couldn't do it anymore. And I just was like, why can't I do all the things that I usually do? And like I just, went to shit, got postpartum depression. And then my psychiatrist and psychologist were like, have you ever considered that like maybe this is going on for you? And I have family members that are both ASD and ADHD, but all male. And I was like, no, I'm not like that. Like, you know, I know what it looks like to have autism. Like I've seen it very closely. Like I don't present like that. And it was a big learning curve to be like, well, actually women are very different to like what little boys present in those like areas. And I guess I kind of was like, then went down the like rabbit hole of like researching into that. So when you got told by a psychologist, were you like, okay, let's start the diagnosis process, or were you like resistant?
Plausible deniability. And that plausible deniability, like you've said, it comes from internalized ableism of only understanding and only understanding some of those stereotypical presentations. And I probably should have been better at assessing my internalized ableism, like I said, when it came to that, because I have seen a number of presentations. But again, a lot of those presentations and a lot of the formal diagnoses within the 10 years that I'd worked in that sector were predominantly, again, like you said, little white boys. So still more seeing that stereotypical presentation of autistic traits. So for me, it was very much like, no, I couldn't possibly have autism, because, you know, I have empathy and, you know, I don't, you know, walk on my tiptoes, or I didn't have a speech delay, or those sort of stereotypical traits. But me being me, who loves the rabbit hole and loves the good research, I did walk away from that and go and do my own readings and read the scientific literature, which was actually very easy for me to do being a university student and having access to a university library. I can definitely access lots of research that the general population can't, like actual scientific research in terms of female presentations. And I think the more I read, the more I was like, oh, damn, actually, I'm very autistic.
It's funny, like one thing that I remember was like really clear after I sort of got like over the shock of like being told like, oh, you like when I've done your screening for ADHD, I didn't know this at the time, but my clinical psychologist also screened for BPD and ASD sort of at the same time, because she was like, these are the ones, they have so much overcrossing of each other that she was like, for you to get an ADHD diagnosis, like, and for me to send my report to your psychiatrist, I have to tell him that I checked for the others, because sometimes they can all be misdiagnosed for each other. Anyway, so she was like, you definitely don't have BPD, but she was like, you are very autistic. Like, she was like, you're just extremely high masking. And I remember being like, no, I don't have like any problems, or like, I don't present like with any of the things that, you know, autistic people like have. And she was like, you never have like sensory issues? And I was like, I don't think so. She's like, are you a fussy eater? I was like, yeah, extremely, have always been my whole life. She was like, and how do you go with loud noises and things like that? I'm like, I don't know, like I've always hated clubbing. I found it really scary. It would give me panic attacks, like blah, blah, but I'm just an old soul, I think, and just like never liked to party. And she was like, so that's sensory issues. I was like, oh, wow. She was like, so like you never had a party stage? I was like, no, I tried to go to a festival once and had a panic attack and like literally ended up in the hospital because my panic attack was so bad. And then she was like, what if I told you it might not have been a panic attack and it's like an autism, like overstimulation? I was like, oh, like my whole brain just like exploded. And it's funny how like when you have lived a certain way your entire life, and then often when you're around people who are the same, because usually if you're neurodiverse, there are other people in your direct immediate family who are also neurodiverse, you just don't realize what things are normal and what things are not.
You do see a lot of that when children go and get diagnosed, is the parents will go, oh, but that's, I do that. And then you've got the psychiatrist or the psychologist sitting in the room going, yes. So they actually, some parents find it hard to recognize neurodivergent traits in their children because they have the same traits and they're like, yeah, but I do that. So that's fine. Yeah. And I guess it's the same kind of thing. Look, I would say personally for me, a lot of the friendships I have held in terms of, friends I've had or groups of friends that I've had throughout my life have all probably been neurodivergent. And again, it's just that you're attracting the people who have similar communication styles to yourself. So again, I think that's why it was also a little bit harder for me to pick up, because I'm surrounded by friends who are essentially the same. But obviously you see struggles when you like have to go into employment, or as we've said with women, there's that very big pipeline of being undiagnosed, reaching motherhood, and then being diagnosed, because we know that with masking, you have to have coping mechanisms to mask, right? And your level of demand might sit quite lowly as a single person, so you can meet those demands. But you can imagine the kind of demands going from being a single person to now raising a whole human being. That's a massive jump in demand. So your coping don't meet that level of demand, and that's when you'll start to see yourself, and that's when we start to see women completely fall apart and unmask. And it is quite common again that you see that internalized ableism in a lot of people, where it's like, oh no, I'm fine. Everybody else is handling it. I just need to do better and be better. And you keep telling yourself that over and over again, rather than actually addressing the fact that you might be struggling. And thoughts like that, because that is internalized ableism, right? Where we tell ourselves, oh no, I just need to do better and I just need to be better. Internalized ableism isn't always stereotyping certain disabilities. That can be a type of internalized ableism in itself, not addressing the fact that, hey, I am functioning differently. Why am I functioning differently? And forcing ourselves to fit into the typical. And that prevents people from seeking diagnosis as well, because you go, well, I don't actually think there's anything wrong with me. I just need to do better and be better, which is actually not the case.
I'm just stupid. I can't focus. Like, I need to be more disciplined. I need to X, Y, and Z, which is a big one for me, discipline. Like my whole life, I was like, I just need to be stricter on myself and I just need to be disciplined. I'm just like have a problem because everyone else can like stay to a routine, can stay to a goal, can stay whatever. And it's just me, like I don't have any discipline. And it took a long time and a lot of therapy to be told, hey, your brain actually does not have the function for you to be disciplined. Like it cannot let you. And that's why you can't like stick to things like everyone else. And that's why you can't like follow through with things like everyone else. You need to do it a bit differently to everyone else. And I was like, oh, but I feel like the problem with internalized ableism is like what those thoughts a lot of the time that you're thinking, when you express them, are often affirmed by like society, of especially when you are a woman who is high masking, and like, you know, a lot of us, like a lot of traits is like people pleasing. So people think you're really nice, you're really easy to get along with, overachieving, because like we base a lot of our value on like external achievements, whatever. So then people look at you and they're like, you're so fine. Like you've done all these amazing things. You're like doing all of, you know, whatever. And so then they're like, yeah, you are right. Like you don't have anything wrong with you. And then, you know, you kind of get stuck in this cycle where you're really struggling and you're trying to express to people like, hey, like stuff isn't working the way that I want it to and I just can't get it to. And it's really hard when people are not affirming, which is why I feel like, I don't know if you feel the same, but like discussing what I have gone through is so important, because I feel like it's when it's not discussed enough and there's no like scientific research really that goes into at the moment that's gone into like neurodiversity in women. It's all of it is around like mostly younger boys. So I'm like, no, I want to tell people like, hey, I do have ASD and this is what it can look like. Surprise, like maybe the thing you're struggling with is actually not just you being lazy or dumb or undisciplined. Like there might be something else going on with you. Or, you know, another really interesting thing for me was like I took an antidepressant for 4 or 5 years and was like, yeah, I feel like it does something, but it's not really like hitting the way that I thought it would or the way that everyone else like sort of described it was. And then I remember like when I got my first like bottle of Vyvanse and like it was like 10 in the morning. And so my psychiatrist was like, maybe don't take like a pill today, like take it tomorrow. And I was like, nope, like I'm driving straight to the pharmacy. Like I'm trying this stuff. Like I want to see like, is this right? Whatever. And I remember within 45 minutes of taking my first dose, I was like ready to punch a hole through a glass window because I was so angry because I was like, holy shit, like this has done more for my brain in 45 minutes than 5 years of taking an antidepressant. And I just spent like the whole day crying because I was so angry and so disappointed that I was like, cool, I have been like bare knuckling through this entire life experience and there was one tablet that I could take a day that helps me within half an hour of taking it. Like this is a joke. Did you find like you did when you like got diagnosed and started learning about it and like started that process, were you like, oh my God, so much makes sense, but also like, oh my God, I'm so pissed off and my whole like view of life has changed? And
like for a lot of people, you know, after diagnosis, like you can go through certain stages. I know when I got my diagnosis in the beginning, I was relieved because I do feel like, you know, a lot of the time within both communities, both autism and ADHD, that goes on and you experience a lot of gaslighting in terms of things that you're struggling with. So I think there is a sense for some people of relief, which was certainly my case. And I understand what you mean by the medication. You take it and you're like, oh, so this is how people live. Mm-hmm. People's brains don't move like a high horsepowered Ferrari like mine. And I think particularly for myself, you know, not everybody feels that immediate relief in terms of medication. And obviously medication is certainly only one part of the picture in terms of treating things like ADHD, because obviously there's still skill gap and interventions that are needed. And I'm very big on, you know, medication might be 30% of the picture, but, you know, pills don't build skills. We need to build other coping mechanisms. And so for me, obviously having symptoms that are very internalized, like a lot of my hyperactivity is in the brain.
Do you want to try because your headphones are like popping in and out. Do you want to try disconnecting them and just using your phone, Mike?
All right. Is that better?
Yeah, that's heaps better.
Okay, amazing.
When you're talking about like medication isn't like the whole picture, totally agree. Like I'm still in therapy, have been in therapy since being medicated. But a really good way that it got explained to me, because I had a lot of anxiety around taking medication, right? And the idea of like, well, if I take a medication, like, am I going to be on this for the rest of my life? And am I going to be dependent on this? Like whatever. And then it like really got explained to me in a way of like your brain at the moment is just stuck in freeze. Like it's gone beyond fight or flight or fawn and has gone into freeze. And they were like, you physically, when you're in this state, like your brain cannot take on any new information, any new skills. So like you could do 10 years of therapy and you will probably see absolutely zero progress because your brain is just like, hey, I'm just trying to survive right now. I don't need anything new. Like I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing and just stay alive each day. Because like a really interesting thing I've learned is like when you're in survival mode, your brain has no future thinking capacity. So it cannot in any way think like, oh, if I do this now in a year's time, this is going to lead to this. It's literally just like, how do I make it to the next second? Like, and it will just do anything it can to protect you in that sense. So like, it can't do like, it might be like, oh, I'm so exhausted that I need to sleep. And it can't think, oh, but if I sleep all day and don't show up to my job, like I'm not going to have a job and then I'm not going to have money and then I can't eat. Like it doesn't have the capacity to think that far forward. It's just thinking like, oh, tired now, need to sleep in survival mode, whatever. And so like my care team were like, you need to take the medication so we can get your brain in a space so that we can start actually giving you skills so that you can live like a really happy life with like a high quality life. And I'm like, oh, okay, which was like a really hard thing for me to kind of come to terms with. And I have like a lot of people that DM me all the time. They're like, I'm so scared to take my medication. And I always like remind them of that I'm like, right now your brain is in a place that even if you didn't take your medication and you just committed yourself 100% to like skills and therapy, is probably not going to be effective right now. Like this is going to help you get to where you ultimately want to go.
I do have this conversation with people a lot of the time because I think there are parts of the population, and with the way that ADHD in particular can be presented, and the way it's been presented to the general population of, oh no, it's just a bit of hyperactivity, you just can't focus a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because of the way that it's been presented, people very, very quickly forget that ADHD has a neurological component to it. There's a brain chemistry component to that, in which our reward system, due to a lack of dopamine, in layman's terms, I could sit here and describe it in depth between neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters. But in layman's terms, we really struggle to use and keep dopamine, right, which affects our reward systems, which it ultimately affects us being able to do medial tasks. So there is that neurological component that I do think people forget, that with a lot of us, we can build the coping skills through therapies, etc. But a lot of us, to get over the line, you need that medication, because quite frankly, there is something going on inside there with the actual neurotransmitters, right, and the lack of dopamine that you're not necessarily going to be able to fix just with psychological coping skills.
In my like friendship group, in my relationship, I call my like my antidepressant and my Vyvanse, I call it spicy insulin, because I always joke that like when you have diabetes and your pancreas carks it and is like, I'm not working anymore, you're going to have to give me insulin to like keep me going, no one thinks twice about it. Like if someone comes up to you and has diabetes, you're like, yeah, of course, take insulin. Like you need it. You're like, your pancreas doesn't work like my pancreas and it needs like a little bit extra help. And so like the way that I kind of like have positioned it is like, that's like me with my brain. Like it just doesn't work like a normal person's brain works, and that's okay. It just needs its spicy insulin to get it back on track every day. And it helped me so much take away like the stigma, because I had so much internalized stigma, like, and I put so much pressure on myself. And when I sort of reframed it that way, I was like, okay, like this is fine. Like this is okay. And it just helped me like get over that initial hump of like feeling a lot of shame around the idea of needing to take medication. Seeing as we're talking about being up past bedtime, I'm taking a quick break to remind you to make a new Harvest Moon milk so tonight you can have the best sleep possible. It's NH's dreamy magnesium-rich drink that helps you actually relax, even when your mind is running a million miles an hour. New Harvest is all about real women's wellness. No fluff, no weird ingredients, just products that work. And I can say that confidently as a customer and user of their products for almost 5 years now. Use the code BELLSMESSINA at checkout when you shop at www.nakedharvestsupplements.com. That's BELLSMESSINA at checkout. Thank me later when you actually wake up rested. Okay, now that you've got a moon milk in hand, let's get back to the episode.
100%. There is so much stigma. And again, I think the stigma around medication also comes from the fact, like I said, with how ADHD has been presented to people within society. It's presented as something that's quite trivial, because a lot of times people really focus on the surface level traits and symptoms of ADHD. They don't see the severe executive dysfunction and self-regulatory dysfunction that comes from ADHD. I do think a lot of that is due to the name. When we call something attention deficit hyperactive disorder, we can see first and foremost the kind of connotations that's going to have. You've just got to few attentive problems. You've just got a few, problems with hyperactivity. Like I said, you can't sit still. But really, in essence, this is a self-regulatory disability, and it's very serious. And nobody sees, the lack of emotional regulation. Nobody sees the severe comorbids that come with ADHD, like anxiety and depression. We know from research that children who have ADHD diagnosed or undiagnosed by the time they're aged 11 have experienced about 20,000 more negative connotations about themselves from the people around them than a neurotypical child. Then you're dealing with problems on top of that of, low self-esteem, low self-worth. We don't take ADHD as seriously as we should. And this is why I often have open conversations around the trivial nature in which ADHD is represented, because it is a very serious and quite debilitating disability. It affects interpersonal relationships, it affects employment, it affects education. It really, really does bleed into every facet and functioning of your life. And I don't feel like, personally, obviously, as somebody who has sat in both communities, the autism community and the ADHD community, I feel like when I tell people that I have autism, I receive way more empathy than what I do if I would say I have ADHD.
Yeah.
My personal experience.
I would say the same, but I also feel like when I say that I have ASD, it's very invalidated. No, you don't. You don't have ASD. You're not autistic. You're just saying that for I'm like, who would want to just say that? Like, that's a really big part of the struggles I have had in life. And I wish I could just say no, I don't have it. I'm so fine and everything's great. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And it's so wild when it's I have professionals who have diagnosed me with, years and years of experience and degrees and whatever. And then you have just everyday blow that's oh, no, you don't. I'm like, okay, cool. No worries. It's so frustrating. And yeah, I think the problem is though, and I know you would see this online. It's almost people think that ADHD is a trend. And I'm like, you can't after especially going through the diagnosis process, I'm it is not just it's not a trend. It's not just something you do for fun. It is very expensive to get diagnosed. It is a very long process. I'm no one is just doing that on a whim. That's not the way that the medical system works. And so I just find that so frustrating when people say that to you as well, because then you're okay.
Yeah. And I think that people probably need to try and think a little bit more deeply about that as well, because I understand that maybe the way things or the way ADHD is presented online, it might be presented as it's a trend. But I think if you think of it this way, obviously we know online how an algorithm works, right? And how even when you're trying to make educational content, you've got to put it to an audience in which you need to make it palatable to reach an audience, if that makes sense. And I do think that that's part of what happens online. My actual main concern around the trivialness around ADHD is that this trivialness occurs in our classrooms with uneducated teaching professionals. It's even in the medical field. They still view it as this very trivial thing, and not every paediatrician, believe it or not, psychiatrist, actually has the best possible understanding of the negative effects of ADHD and how severe, even within those fields, and I've seen it myself, even within those fields, it's treated quite trivial, which probably concerns me more than the ADHD people making content online who are possibly making it to suit an algorithm. It is still slightly annoying to watch, but I think as long as a content creator is presenting both sides of things, probably less problematic. But my concern probably is when it's occurring within the system more than online, to be honest.
When you got diagnosed, you've gone through the unmasking process, maybe are still going through the unmasking process. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I have found that the most confronting part, like not my life before getting diagnosed, not the diagnosis, the afters of like, okay, now I've gotten diagnosed, I've gone to therapy, I'm starting to learn skills where they're like, okay, well, you don't actually have to do that skill every day. That's taking a lot of your energy. You can just, find safe places to be yourself and, present authentically. That was the most unsettling bit to me, because I was just in a state where my whole life, even at home, even by myself, I never let myself be myself.
Yeah.
And that was really confronting to go through. And I feel like, we both have gone through massive life changes after getting diagnosed. And I think a big result of that is learning to unmask. Did you find that yourself?
Yeah, so definitely unmasking has, over the past probably 2 years, has been probably one of the hardest things really that I've been through. And look, I've had my life implode quite a few times. I'm a I am I am a person whose dad died of a heroin overdose when I was 7, whose mum was heavily involved in drug trafficking and a drug syndicate, who witnessed horrific family violence at the hands of a stepfather, who I've spent 3 months at one point fleeing in a women's refuge with my mum. And then I lived in kinship care with the people who were family members of the person who perpetrated family violence against myself and my mum. And then I did, however many years in a religious sect and married into a religious sect. Quite frankly, I have had some diabolical experiences, to put it best. And even amongst all of that, I don't think I've ever experienced the grief, the anger, and all the emotions I feel like that has come with unmasking. But I obviously do think to a degree, while masking my autism and my ADHD, there is also masking all of those other traumas that go with having grown up with a life like that. So really you begin to unmask, and you do. I've lived in survival mode most of my life. I do what I need to do, you know what I mean? Because I have to. And, very recently, I've had to allow that all to implode and rebuild myself from the ground up, essentially. So it's not even for me just unmasking neurodivergence, it's literally unmasking everything. I think the other thing as well is that naturally in my family, I am the problem solver. What's been really, really hard for me to come to terms with is that, I love my family dearly, but there were my ex-husband and some of my family members who were contributing to things like burnout. And I had to have a therapist be blunt and tell me that, because whenever there's a problem in my house, it's always me that they come to for it to fix. And you know what, I willingly help my friends and my families. I never expect anything from it. The problem with me, I get into that mindset where then when I need help and I'm falling apart and I verbalize that, it's kind of because I am the problem solver and the problem fixer in my house, it's just like, oh, well, it's either brushed aside or completely ignored. And I said to my therapist, the thing is like for me, I get stuck in that mentality that I'm like, well, I don't help other people to get anything in return. So I've constantly just pushed that to the side and gone, well, it is what it is. Even though I help other people, I shouldn't expect anything in return, and it does sometimes take somebody else to be like, well, actually, no, other people still need to respect your, emotional boundaries, and also you can't be expected to do emotional labor for everybody and then when you need it not even have an ounce of emotional labor in return.
Yeah.
So I think just over the last probably definitely 10 months it's just all imploded. I mean, which is not new to me. I often implode every now and again, but you know what, I just think to myself, I'm just going to build myself up from the ground up, really.
It's funny, like when you were talking about like the giving and the low taking is like kind of how I frame it to people is like, I learned after getting diagnosed that my biggest masking skill was fawning and people pleasing, right? That was my go-to to like survive in, especially in social situations, is like, well, if I just do everything that people want me to do, they're going to like me because I'm fulfilling their wants and needs, and they're going to overlook some of the odd things about me, or the things that don't fit, or the things that make me a bit off. And so I've done that like my entire life. Like when we got into it, I was like, no, I can remember doing this from like 5 years old. Like I have always done this to get through every day. The problem with that is you end up attracting people who benefit from that or who capitalize on that. Like that is the way it kind of works. And you end up with people who put that role on you, and they're like, oh, I love Bella because she always, you know, is there for me and always does everything I need from her and whatever. So then when I started the unmasking process, it wasn't just one relationship that I was like, oh, this is a really one-sided, like unfair relationship. I kind of looked around at my life and was like, oh, fuck. Every relationship, all the major relationships in my life were all structured like that. And I had to be like, oh, so if I unmask and actually take that expectation off myself and go, hey, I don't need to please everyone and fawn over everyone to be accepted, to be loved, to be liked. I then had all these people in my life who started getting really angry at me and being like, well, you've never said no to this before. You've never held a boundary on that before. You've never done this before. Like, what do you mean now you're not like doing what I want or giving me what I want? And that was a really confronting realization to kind of come across. And I was actually talking to my therapist the other day, and we were talking about like interpersonal relationships I had. And then I was like, yeah, you know, like the one person that I don't have this problem with is my new boyfriend. And she was like, that's probably because you've established a relationship with him on a completely different like values base, because you've already started unmasking by the time you met him. So when you're creating a relationship with him, you're creating it on different things to all the other people in your life. And I was like, that is so fascinating to sort of see like the difference that you get from the unmasking process.
I think the difference between probably yourself and myself is I'm not necessarily a people pleaser in that aspect. I think my problem is that I can be my own worst enemy, in that a lot of people don't have to ask me for emotional labor. I just naturally give it because I want to, and I guess that's probably reflective of the field that I'm going into. And sometimes I also fail to recognize that, you know, drowning people can't help drowning people. So when I'm struggling, it is okay for me to take a step back from constantly giving that emotional labor. And look, have been many, many times in which, you know, the emotional labor is just expected from me. Definitely that was certainly something that I have struggled with within my marriage as a whole, and certainly what contributed to it imploding. And I also don't necessarily think that always came down to my ex-husband. I think a lot of it just comes down to living in a patriarchal society as well. And I think that even within that relationship, because of my certain situation in which, you know, I was the person who had to give up, you know, my job, my means of financial, you know, stability to stay home because I didn't have a choice. Like, and I also have to reiterate that to people, like, it wasn't a choice for me. My child needed me, and I was the one who had to make that sacrifice, which I would do over and over again because we'd burn cities for our children. Honestly, I'd burn cities for less. But I think that, like, I watched all of that situation unfold over the last 2 years, right? Yeah. And I watched how, you know, I was the one that was constantly expected to do that. Like, I was constantly the one that carried the mental load of, you know, understanding the children, understanding the diagnoses, understanding myself, where the other person, their sole concern was bringing in money. To be fair, I was also bringing in money for a large part of that, 18-month, 2-year period as well. But I was still expected to do all the other emotional, physical and mental labour on top of that. And like I said, it wasn't necessarily down to my ex-husband as a person. Again, it was just like the situation I was in.
Yeah.
And it really highlighted to me like what it was to live in a patriarchal, not even just a patriarchal, but in, ableist structures and systems.
Yeah.
And, I could deep dive it and things like capitalism, etc. And it was just really, really hard, I think, for me to come to terms with because, as much as I absolutely adore, being a mother, I still had goals outside of that I just felt like I have to work 10 times harder, not even 10 times harder, it feels like sometimes 100 times harder than my significant other who's a man to be able to even get ahead in achieving those goals. And I think I came to a crossroads where I vent or speak about those things to my significant other and kind of was just told, oh, well, that's the world we live in, I can't help or fix that. And it felt very invalidating, I guess, for me. I think it was just, those kinds of things were a massive struggle, being at home for 3 weeks at a time, and there were points with that where I just wasn't able to leave the house ever. Like I was literally stuck in my home. Like my home eventually felt like a prison. Like even at the moment, like I've been through a CPTSD diagnosis and I actually have CPTSD living in my house because so much trauma has occurred within these 4 walls. And that's really hard because I live here. How do I escape that? Like how do I work on that? Yeah, so there's been lots that has gone on in 18 months, 2 years. A lot.
For anyone listening who maybe isn't tracking what situation Emily's talking about, her son, her youngest child, he has both an ADHD and ASD diagnosis now, doesn't he? Anyway, he had some neurodivergence issues and had some troubles like assimilating to the school system and, emotional regulation and just things that do happen when children present with neurodiversity. And so Emily then ended up having to do like full-time homeschooling. They were doing hospital visits. They were going really through it for a year there. I remember watching that and being like, oh my goodness, you are really going through a full-on time. And I guess that also would have been very hard for someone who is also neurodivergent to experience all of that and watch it and understand. Like, yeah, it's great. You have a lot of empathy and understanding because you understand what he feels like. But then it would also be very, very hard because you guys, I'm sure, would struggle with similar issues around emotional regulation, around like expression of emotion, like so many things that they're struggling with. You're like, me too. And I don't know how to like 100% help you because I am you, like you are me, like we're struggling with a lot of the same stuff.
There are certainly times where it feels like it's the blind leading the blind. In saying that, I look at myself and, while it was very, very difficult, the thing is I do think sometimes that I feel for parents who certainly don't even have anywhere near the experience or the lived experience that I might have had, say, through previous work where I have, read through lots and lots of OT reports, psych reports, speech reports, where I have been the person who's actively in a classroom had to put in place, certain interventions with children who have diagnoses. So for me, and then obviously having done, just doing my psych degree, I certainly have, I guess, a background knowledge that even a lot of parents don't have, that, I could, even though I couldn't access services, there were certain things that I could try at home that I had knowledge of to help me, where I think like there are a lot of parents out there who are really starting from scratch and like how hard even that must be for them. Because for me, having the background knowledge, although it certainly doesn't even begin to fill the gap because I'm not an OT and I'm not a speechy, and I haven't been to uni for 4 years to do that, because I do have generalized knowledge of what sort of interventions are used and how they can be applied, because I've had to apply them to other people's children. It was helpful in that aspect. It is very difficult, but again, I do appreciate sometimes and check my privilege that for other family members, like I said, who don't even have the foundational knowledge and can't access, interventions or services, that must be really, 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 really difficult.
I say that all the time. Like, that is a big thing that I've discussed very regularly, is how blessed I am to have been able to access the care team that I have. And I think a big shock to my system was the difference of my ability to access that care team when I was married versus as a single person, and on a single income. When I was married, it was something that was very easily accessible in a financial sense. I still had to wait crazy long wait lists and all those other things, but the financial burden of it was okay. And then, when I've left my marriage, it has become a very heavy financial burden. It is something that I have to really work hard to be able to keep going and keep meeting, because I'm not someone who's oh yeah, I go to, therapy once a quarter or something like that. It's I go weekly to fortnightly. That's $260, every time. And my mental health plan, that bloody got used up in the first couple of months of the year. We're in June now. I don't get any Medicare rebate anymore. I see a psychiatrist 3 monthly. It's a very expensive process to go through. And yeah, I always reflect on when you don't have access to any of that, how frustrating it would be and how demotivating it would be, and just really it would make you feel so trapped and so strangled. And I think that's why I've become so passionate about discussing, even some of the stuff that I have learned that I can safely pass on to people that, is not high level medical stuff, even little skills or little coping mechanisms and things like that. I really love sharing that part of my journey for a high percentage of people who are stuck in that situation at the moment and can't get the help that they rightly deserve.
Yeah, it's really hard. And obviously I see that a lot in my inboxes weekly. I definitely, I'm definitely a person who does receive in the inboxes a lot of trauma dumping. And I absolutely even behind the scenes, even when I'm not online a lot, and I obviously haven't been online a lot in the past, probably I would say 8 months, still behind the scenes, I get a lot of inboxes, and I absolutely even do my best where I can to help people access psychiatrists and psychologists, ones within their affordability or ones that have less wait lists. Even I'm limited in what I can do, because again, the financial barriers to being able to access diagnosis is obviously very huge. But then the other added part of the problem is that getting a diagnosis is only one step. Really, the diagnosis is the beginning of the journey for most people, most families. You then need to be able to have the interventions. And currently, we are just lacking so many interventions, to be quite honest, and accessing interventions. And there are so many families, so many families. Even NDIS doesn't really do much. It doesn't really cover much. A lot of people are still having to pay excess out of pocket for the interventions themselves or their children need. It's really inaccessible on a number of different levels, to be honest. And again, these are systematic issues. And so it is really difficult. And that's why I guess when people think, I don't know what people think, what benefits people think you get from saying you have autism, because quite frankly, we're not getting anything.
We're not, I feel if anything, you're getting marginalised the second you say you have autism.
I really, and it's not with all people, but a lot of people, I don't know, there's just this consensus that even with NDIS you get on there and you get all this money or you get all this stuff, and I'm like, it's so sad, because I do see the reality in my inboxes with families that they desperately need the help, and some of them are even on NDIS and they're just not getting anywhere
Well,
near
I could, with my history and obviously my in-laws owned like NDIS support businesses, whatever. I could go on about the NDIS system forever. And like my biggest irk is when people are like, oh, it's just like a money grab scam or whatever. I'm like, you have obviously never dealt with the system and never directly dealt with people who have like disabilities and have to get on like even just the process of getting your funding. I'm like, this is not set up for people who are like disabled. Like this is not at all.
Process
like,
is quite ableist in itself, really.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm like, of course, someone who is like maybe neurodiverse isn't getting the funding they need because they're not answering the questions in a way that's like meeting the boxes or whatever, not because they don't meet the criteria. It's just like they don't understand how to express like the needs they have, etc. Oh, makes me so angry. I guess like one thing that I would ask you, like you make so much content around like neurodiversity. If someone is listening to this and they have like heard our discussion and been like, oh my God, I relate to that or whatever, what is something you would say to someone going through the thick of it? Like what are some like red flags that they could like keep an eye out for, or like first steps they could do, or I don't know, what would you say to someone who's like, I don't know where to start?
I mean, in terms of where to start to get a diagnosis, I feel like I definitely get this question a lot. I feel like at this point I'm probably a broken record when I answer it. But yeah, always, I guess the process with any of these things is always going to start with your general practitioner. You do need to go and get a referral from your general practitioner 9 times out of 10. You know, depending on what it is, if it's ADHD, you know, you might need to specifically ask for a 291 mental health care plan. I guess once you've got that referral, the next issue is then finding either a psychologist who is able to diagnose those things. I just need to reiterate, because there's a lot of confusion around this too. Like, not all psychologists and psychiatrists have the education and adept to actually diagnose everything. You do actually need to find psychologists and psychiatrists or pediatricians, if it's a child, that have the relevant training and education to actually do it. Obviously, psychiatrists are really, really hard to come by, more than probably psychologists at this point in time. You can actually get diagnosed for ADHD with a psychologist. Unfortunately, they just will not be able to medicate you. You then have to take your diagnostic report to a psychiatrist. The other added issue with the system is then some psychiatrists will want to re-diagnose you, depending on the psychiatrist you go to. So I've had a couple of people who've had that issue in my inbox, which I think is so ridiculous when you have a psychologist who is quite adept in being able to diagnose. It is a bit ridiculous, but I guess there would be some out there who, you know, want to cross all their T's and dot all their I's. I can't blame them for that. Obviously, with children, the process for children in terms of being diagnosed with particularly autism is a little bit different to adults. It's very much a more multidisciplinary allied health approach in that often it requires, you know, not just a paediatrician, but it requires, you know, an OT assessment, a speech assessment. Sometimes a speechy will do things like the ADOS. Sometimes you'll need to then go to a psychologist to do an ADOS. You might need to see a neuropsych to do a WISC test, which is like an IQ test to rule out that the developmental gaps are not coming from intellectual disability, or if there is intellectual disability on top of a possible autism diagnosis. Because they can be, you know, comorbids in that they can go hand in hand together. So yeah, the diagnostic process can be different depending on the individual, whether it's an adult, you know, an adult or a child, really. At this point, honestly, I don't actually surprisingly have a lot of advice, and I think I've said this even on this podcast, because of the fact that autism is such a spectrum, and even ADHD really occurs in varying traits. You know,
well, even look it up. We're talking about the way that we both present and how we've pointed out so many times in this podcast, like, oh, I actually don't have that. I do this instead. Like, it is so different person to person.
It is, and I think that's why it's really actually hard to give specific advice to people. My main advice to anybody going through the diagnostic process or has been through the diagnostic process or, struggles with executive function is to be kind to yourself. It's like a never-ending journey, to be honest. And like I said, I feel like you get things under control and then something else happens and then you're back to square one some of the time. It's pretty common, with managing neurodivergence as well.
I call it the babushka doll problem. You unpack one and there's another little parcel waiting and you're just going through layers and layers and layers, one after the other.
Yeah, look, it is really difficult, to be honest. And again, it's really, really hard because, like I said, diagnosis is inaccessible for a lot of reasons, And they exist, those reasons, outside of even just being able to financially afford a diagnosis. Like I know we've spoken about that idea of self-diagnosis versus formal diagnosis. And how there's so much criticism with self-diagnosis. And when I hear criticisms about self-diagnosis, I really feel like it's coming from a very privileged lens. So I do think, like, personally, when I hear this argument, if you can't understand the nuances and that some populations and people self-diagnosis is very, very valid, then those people certainly need to do more reading on the history of psychology and intersectionality.
I have really loved this chat. I feel like you and I could sit here and yap for hours. And I feel like you're just a wealth of knowledge on this topic. And you're actually someone that I personally will come to and be like, hey, can I ask you a question about this or whatever? Because, sharing my diagnosis journey has come with a lot of criticism, a lot of backlash, a lot of challenges. It was funny when you before were talking about not all professionals can diagnose everything. Is like when I got my ADHD diagnosis and then I was like, well, I'm still in the process of my ASD diagnosis. I had heaps of people being like, oh, well, she's just saying she has ASD because if she had ASD, like her psychiatrist would have diagnosed her with that as well. And I was like, well, no, he's actually not qualified to diagnose adults with ASD. And I've gone to a clinical psychologist to get my ASD diagnosis because I don't need medication for it and blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't take medication for it. But then you just end up in this loop of like trying to explain things to people that you're like, this is pointless and an uphill battle. But yeah, I just feel like you are, for myself and a lot of people, a safe space when it comes to like discussing neurodivergence and like the real realities of living with either yourself or someone having some type of ND diagnosis. If people want to find you and they want to come and follow you, where can they find you?
Well, yep, I'm over on TikTok. Not as frequently as I'd like to be recently, but obviously you really just have to type in my name, Emily Geraghty.
You'll pop up.
It'll pop up.
We got beautiful, professional, very intelligent, speaking about her biggest like special interest, Emily, today. And I'm like, I think people will be a bit like, oh, Emily Dooley, because I love TikTok Emily. Like that is unfiltered, unhinged. She's going to say what she's thinking and she doesn't give a F, Emily. And I love that.
Yeah, I do think I think that's probably what to be honest, a lot of my followers do like, is in one slide of a story I can be so professional and then the next slide I'm just fully crashing out over something. There's a real juxtaposition, but I like to say I'm multidimensional. I mean, obviously...
As we all are, Dolly.
Honestly, Instagram, look, you could probably type in my full name again and something could come up, but it's actually Emily_Georgina96 on Instagram.
Perfect. Amazing. Do you think I've missed anything? Is there something that you wanted to share that you think I haven't touched on?
No, I don't think so. Listen, Don't ask me that because we'll be here doing a TED Talk for the next 5 hours.
Well, thanks for coming on, Doll, and having this little chat and giving your perspective, and I've loved it.
Well, thanks for having
me. Maybe we'll have to do like a part 2 and do another chat another time because I feel like there is so much more we could have gone into.
Oh, yeah, you give me a topic and I can go for days.
All right. Thanks, doll.
Well, thank you for having me.